Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Agronomists. Sorry, we were having probably too much fun in the green room tonight. All right, I cannot wait to bring in tonight's guests. This is an interesting one. This is the first time we're going to do a bit of a free for all. So the topic is not necessarily set. It's probably going to focus quite a bit on cereals, but not only cereals. But hey, get your questions, get your comments in early. We'll see how many we can get through in an hour. I did want to mention, of course, that you can earn your CEU credits for watching The Agronomists. Head over to realagriculture.com/agronomist tomorrow to sign up for those. All right, and wonderful to see so many regulars in the comments already. Viren, you get a Starbucks coffee the next time I see you for being first. And hats off to Canadian Cowman for having fieldwork done. Well done. And Warren, Farmer Schneck, good evening as well. How many beans did you get done today? Was it more or less than one? I'm going to say it was less. Okay, so without further ado, let's bring in my guests for this evening. I've got Jeremy Boychyn with Alberta Wheat and Barley Commissions and Peter Wheat Pete Johnson of Real Agriculture fame. Welcome here, gents.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Good evening.
Hello. Jeremy, is your garage door going to open suddenly at any point?
I hope not. If it does, it's certainly not by me, and I don't know who's coming in.
So. Okay, so all right. So Jeremy, you're based in Alberta, of course. Pete here in Ontario. We are going to have an epic East versus West battle. I'm kidding, sort of. Except I do want to kick off the evening with 3 questions, sort of rapid fire format, and it's going to get the lay of the land of just how far apart we are culturally. Okay. So, if I'm putting on boots because it is wet out, are they gum boots or rubber boots?
Rubber.
Okay, Jeremy?
I think they're muck boots.
Oh,
I think you missed the mark on both ends.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah,
okay, well, okay.
Gum boots is Australian, isn't it?
Okay, Canadian Cowman, back me up. It's a BC thing. Gum boots are a BC thing, far west. All right, somebody back me up on this. Okay, all right, question 2. If I went straight into the rhubarb, did I fall down drunk or did I hit the ditch with my car?
I'm going to go with option 2 on that. You definitely went into the rhubarb. You took that turn a little too sharp. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So, actually, that's not one that I generally hear. So I'm going to say that I fell down drunk just because, that's an Ontario thing to do.
So
actually, it's a Western thing to do as well. But
straight to the rhubarb. Yeah. Went off the hard pack, says Ray DeBanco. Okay, so you ditch the car if you hit the rhubarb.
Keep her shiny side up.
Yeah, there you go. Keep her between the ditches. Okay, and the last one, this is for my Manitoba friends out there. I see you, Jason Vogt. If I am going to a party and bringing a tray of dainties, is it a tray of sandwiches, a tray of desserts, or a tray of pickles and assorted pickled onions?
Sandwiches here.
Okay.
Gee, I hope it's not that last option. I won't be there. I'm going to have to go with sandwiches as well. I've never heard that before, though.
Okay, so you're both fired. It's desserts, but actually, no, it is a Manitoba thing, and I didn't know that till I moved away. And I was in Saskatchewan, and we were having a potluck, and I said, "Well, I'll just bring dainties," and no one knew what I was talking about. But it's like a tray of like 2-bite desserts cut into squares, and you can just you bring a tray of assorted ones. See, Ray knows what it is. Okay,
Ray knows everything.
Yeah, Ray knows everything. Okay, so there you go. So now we've got that out of the way. Canada is obviously incredibly culturally divided, as we've established. But what we can all agree on is, of course, is that wheat is the best crop. So that's where we're going to start. And so we'll start with a bit of a recap of where we're at, and then I want to hop right into our discussion on herbicides. So, but Jeremy, I'll start with you. You're probably the furthest from, well, I don't know, any sort of crop growing. So how did things wrap up, I guess, in your neck of the woods?
We do have wheat here or winter wheat here in Alberta. Lyndsey, I know that's shocking to hear. It's shocking. Definitely not the proportion of acres that Ontario gets, but we do have winter wheat here, and some certainly hit the ground this year. I mean, we had a relatively open fall. So those who were prepared and did plan ended up getting some winter wheat in, which was great to hear. But yeah, the winter or the spring wheat crop has been off for a number of weeks now. Between all the hot weather and the lack of rainfall, and in some areas, producers were able to get on the fields relatively soon or relatively early. We did have a pretty early harvest. Sometimes 3 weeks I was hearing where guys were able to get that crop off early. So yeah, had a nice open fall. Unfortunately, that also meant that our crops were quite low. The southern part of the province having their yields impacted quite significantly. Some parts of the northwestern part of the province were looking okay, but in general, I mean, average across the province was quite impacted. And I think I can speak for Saskatchewan a little bit there to say, they're seeing similar results on their end. So yes, we're very done. We would have liked to see more, but the quality seems to be good. I know we'll be talking a little bit potentially about 1,000 kernel weight later. I'm sure we'll get into that. But quality is looking good coming off, which is helpful. But yeah, could have used a little bit more to fill those bins.
Mm-hmm. All right,
and
so
wheat, Jeremy, have you had?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Jeremy, have you had a killing frost yet, or are the volunteer canola plants still flowering profusely and using up moisture? How's that all coming together?
Yeah, we had a few days of I don't know whether it was a hard killing frost. I chatted with a few producers in the north and a couple in the south, and they did get some cold temperatures. They thought, maybe this might slow them down enough, but there was still some perennials growing, and they were still thinking about hitting them. But as of this past weekend, temperatures dipped quite a bit. -12. -13 overnight, and -5 during the day. So I think we're out of that growth window at this point, and yeah, we're there.
Okay. Now, Pete, we know that, of course, you come by Peter Wheat, Pete Johnson, honestly, and there were probably 1 million wheat acres planned for this fall. Did half of them get in?
Yeah, so that's such a great question, Lyndsey. And by the way, I think there was well over 1 million wheat acres planned to get in, because you look at the price of wheat and you're just going like, oh, baby, let's grow wheat. My guess right now is we're 60% planted of intentions, so we're kind of in that 650,000 acre range. Do I know that for sure? No, that's just a gut feel. We'll know better after the November 7th reporting deadline for Agricor. But I want to say, for goodness sakes, don't stop planting wheat. We finally have a decent window in the long range forecast. Very little rain in the next 2 weeks. And I go way back to when I just was kind of getting involved in this whole extension industry in the early 90s. And in Lambton County, I had a grower who planted wheat in November. I think it was like November the 12th or something like that. He also had wheat planted in October. And just the way the year worked out, it was similar to this year. Way too much moisture after he planted the October wheat. That's why he didn't get any more in. And even back in the early 90s, that wheat field planted in November yielded over 90 bushels per acre. So that's before we applied the management or the better genetics we have today. And it was his best field of wheat. So don't be afraid to plant wheat. There's lots of ways we can still get wheat in the ground and have a good crop here in Ontario. So yeah, I just, the crop insurance deadline is a bit of a concern, but you can plant it after the deadline and still insure it next spring. So keep the faith, and if you get the chance, put it in the ground.
Even if it's
is there tactics? Sorry. Yeah. I was just curious. This late, is there different tactics to make sure we're getting a more successful crop coming up?
Yeah. So the real kicker in that, Jeremy, that you want to do if you're going to do it is you have to up the seeding rate. So when you think about it, when we plant early, we get fall tillers. Fall tillers add significantly to yield. When we get this late, there's zero fall tillers. In fact, you plant November the 6th, November the 7th, November the 20th, rarely do we see that wheat even emerge before the snow comes. But that's okay. It just means fewer tillers. If you're going to have fewer tillers, you need more plants. Shane, my amazing technician, and I did a trial, and it was just a squirt and see trial. So it's not real research, but we were looking at planting dates. We were looking at old varieties. Frederick, if you know Frederick, it's from back in the 70s versus 25R40, one of the current day genetics. And man, it was really interesting. When we planted early, there was not a big yield difference between the two. The later we planted, the more R40 out yielded Frederick. And we planted R40 at 3 million seeds per acre on November the, I don't know, 14th or 15th. And when we upped the seeding rate that much, and we got a decent winter, it wasn't super wet, it was a nice loam soil, that wheat almost yielded as much as the wheat that was planted on October the 5th. So the biggest one, Jeremy, everything else still applies. The seed placed phosphorus, all that kind of stuff. But seeding rate is the one thing that you really have to focus in on.
Now, are you
Okay,
looking
now
for a specific amount of growth out of that winter wheat before heading into the winter, or as long as it's in that ground, we're happy?
As long as it's in the ground, I'm happy. It'll vernalize as soon as it germinates. Don't worry about all that stuff. People, they'll kill that wheat for you 6 times before spring. Unless it drowns out, water is the enemy, nothing else.
Jeremy, it's a whole other world. I gotta tell you, I
Well,
still,
I
it
find
does.
the
It like
conversation so interesting because
I know. I'm with you.
the contrast between what the target is for winter wheat in Ontario versus what our target is with tillers in Alberta is I always have to kind of watch for those comments that come from eastern part of Canada. And tillers is really what contributes to yield, and we want to get as many tillers as possible. And some of that content starts to float to the west, and it's like, whoa. If we're getting all these excess tillers, typically with spring wheat, they're a little bit later, which means they're extending our maturity, which means they're sapping energy from those main tillers and potentially causing quality issues at the end of the year. So our targets are a little bit different, and I always find that conversation a little interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
and the spring versus winter discussion too, right? And then, but I think Pete, and we've covered this, and Jeremy, I think you do too as well, and we've covered it a couple different ways, but really it comes down to exactly that sort of heads per unit area. But those are heads that are, of course, going to mature and actually give you kernels. And as you mentioned, Jeremy, of course, keeping things within a window where you can actually manage that crop. And we're going to get into a little bit of that in a moment. But John, I do want to throw this one out there for you, Pete. John says, with ground conditions as poor as they are right now in some areas, because Ontario, of course, has been walloped with water, do you fly the wheat on? And I sort of liken this conversation to very wet springs out west when you start talking about like flying on canola or just floating it on and harrowing it in. What is sort of our last ditch Hail Mary for winter wheat here in Ontario?
So if you're going to fly it on, Lyndsey, I really think you should have done it back in September when the soybean leaves were just dropping, or just as they started to drop. The challenge now is that if we leave it on the soil surface, we really expose it to cold injury. And if you think about how many times we get those cold temperatures if there's not snow. Now, John's up in the Bruce Peninsula, and so he's in the snow belt. Maybe he gets away with it. But one of the really interesting things, and Jeremy, when you asked me about what do we do from a management standpoint, one of the really interesting things we've learned is that as we go later planting wheat, you kind of think, well, gosh, we're going later, so we should actually shallow our planting depth up. So the wrong thing to do. And you'd think, well, but it'll emerge faster. Well, if it ever emerged, it would emerge more quickly, but it's not going to emerge anyway. And the shallower we place it, the more it's exposed to those big swings in temperature. And it's a bit like planting corn in the spring. We've learned that we don't want to keep corn too shallow because of the temperature swings rather, and the impact that has on the vigor and the uniformity of that plant. So we go a little bit deeper. You put it on the soil surface, and now the growing point is on top of the ground. And if you get those cold frosts, you get it to germinate. It's on the top of the ground. It's hanging on by one root. That's the only thing that's holding it to the ground. The wind blows, that root can twist, and if it twists, it breaks the root. Now the plant is dead. Flying it on this time of year, if you're gonna broadcast it, John, I think you have to run over it with a disc and get it in the ground, or it's just a recipe for probably throwing that money away.
Okay, and as Warren points out, even with this year's cheap wheat seed, 3 million seeds per acre is $130 an acre. So, how much do you love wheat, Pete? I'm just asking.
I don't know. Hard wheat today was over $10 a bushel. 100 bushel wheat at $10 a bushel without selling the straw is $1,000 an acre. I don't know. That's still kind of it's pretty intriguing. Yeah, tempting. Exactly,
okay. Tempting. Okay. All right. We have made it to our first clip. I think. Let's try it out, because as you alluded to, Jeremy, we are going to talk about 1,000 kernel weight, because I have a few tricks up my sleeve, and I do have a few questions that I didn't tell you guys about, and one of them will happen after this clip. So we're going to go to Richard Marsh, who is not Richard Marks, which is what I think of whenever I think of Richard Marsh. Anyway, and this is a video from back in 2016 in evaluating your stand counts and using that 1,000 kernel weight to get there. So let's go to clip 1.
We are in a really neat field. We've got 2 varieties, but more importantly, 2 seeding rates. And so we're going to do a whole bunch of scouting on this field. But first, maybe let's start with plant counts.
Sounds good. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. We've got these test plots here, and we thought we'd try and shoot for 35 plants per square foot population. So we used the TKWs, and we used 10% mortality rate on our variety over here to my right. And we took the chance today to come back and do some counts. And Lyndsey's been a great help in counting, right, Lyndsey?
Sure.
Good job. Somebody was here. Yay math. We can't get away from it. So we did some counts, and we actually are on at 35 plants per square foot on the right hand side, which is really great. And then I think the grower, because we only had 80 acres of wheat here, he skipped right into another variety on our left. And I don't think that he did some TKW calculations and just kept going at that 122 pounds seeding rate we had. And he probably had a bigger seed over here with this variety. And he's got a lower plant population. And you can actually see it visually when you walk in. We didn't need to do our math, did we, Lyndsey? But he's down at 26 plants per square foot, which is within the range where we'd want to be, right? Because depending on the time of the year, you probably want to be somewhere between 25, and some guys are even aggressive and go all the way up to 35 and 40, don't they? But so now he's going to have a little more pressure with weeds coming through, a little more space here, soil space, less plant material. So it's pretty interesting. I think when guys or agronomists and growers are back out doing some herbicide scouting, it's a great time just to get down and do some plant counts and say, okay, did I get my TKW calculation and everything correct last spring here? Did we get the plant population we want? Is there anything we need to adjust on that calculation? It's interesting, I was with a guy last week and we were looking at his field, looking at the plant population, and he said, geez, I think I had the fan speed too high on the air seeder. He said, I've got seed, it should be in a nice straight row and it's all across the furrow, some's on top, and then I was with another guy, and he said, I was going a little bit fast, he said, because you can see on the back rung, the back rows, it's too much soil came in over the top, because I should have probably slowed down a little bit. But, I mean, with the spring the way it was, you just go when you can go, don't you?
Yeah, you do. But I think what's really interesting is just yes, this is very visual, which is really neat. But certainly, if it was all this field that all looks quite good, there's still value in going in there and trying to figure out exactly, did you hit your target plant stand, and maybe, yes, a good reminder of some settings maybe on the seeder, or, well, the speed is one of those. Yes, it was a late and very compressed planting season, so we'll give them that.
Well, because there's a good reason to go for population, right?
Yes.
Because you don't want to get 45, 50 plants when you switch from variety to another variety, because then you might have some lodging issues.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you don't want to be down to 15 to 20 plants per square foot, because then you're never going to get enough tillers to fill in. You're leaving yield on the table right at the start.
Okay, so let's go just quickly over how you did your plant count. So just some quick reminders for growers who might want to head out there and do an evaluation.
Just got to be really random, and actually usually it sounds funny, but I'm highly technical here. I bring a golf ball out and I just throw the golf ball out where it lands, and I'll put my meter row from there. And I always go the same way. So if in this field, let's say I would throw the golf ball out, and then I would always put the meter stick heading west from where the golf ball lands. That way you're not tempted to say, oh, this looks really good or this looks really poor, because that's just human nature, isn't it? So I would do 10 of those counts in each part of the field. And then just average it out afterwards. You can make your calculation on your row width and how many 39 inches on an 11-inch row width will give you somewhere around 2.7 square feet. So you divide your plant counts by 2.7, average them out.
I actually remember that video shoot, if you can believe it. It was a great day. Anyway, it makes me miss home. Okay, a few things. We are going to delve into some of the things that come out of that first, but John did follow up on this discussion of, flying on wheat, and it brings us to another regional word. He says it means we're euchred in this area. I will tell you, I don't think I ever had heard the term euchred meaning this until I moved to Ontario. So there you go. There is that. Now, Warren, Farmer Schneck, has a follow-up. Can you frost seed winter wheat? This is an interesting question.
And the answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely yes.
Now this makes my brain hurt. So when are we frost seeding winter wheat? Like in March? In February?
No, we're actually frost seeding winter wheat in December. And I have frost seeded winter wheat in Ontario as late as January the 24th, and I looked that plot up. So my October wheat yielded 96 bushels per acre. My frost seeded January 24th wheat yielded 75 bushels per acre. And that's back in 2002 that we did those trials. So you just need the same conditions as in the spring. You slice through the frost, you get that cold night, you slice through the frost, you drop the seed, in the ground. And John's saying that he's euchred. Well, if he can frost seed and it stays reasonably without water laying on it, we've had pretty good luck from that perspective. So yes, absolutely, Warren, you can frost seed winter wheat. We've had decent luck. There's the downside of frost seeding winter wheat is that you don't have maximum winter hardiness because you're still just at that seedling stage and there's no leaf sticking above ground. So if you get saturated conditions, if you're on heavy clay soil that's prone to saturated conditions, it's a bit higher risk. On good dirt, Oxford County, man, we've done it a number of times, works great.
I'm with Varen on this one. At what point, if you frost seed winter wheat, does it become spring wheat? Very funny, Varen. Okay, but it does need to, though, the vernalization has to happen after that seed has germinated in order for winter wheat to put up a head. So it does mean that winter wheat seed that you put in the ground has to germinate at some point, then freeze and vernalize, then come up in the spring. So it is a risky proposition.
Not at all. Not from a vernalization standpoint. Sorry.
We
have so much. No. It's, again, it will imbibe. If you're punching through the frost and putting it in unfrozen soil, it needs 48 hours of unfrozen soil. It imbibes. As soon as it's imbibed, it will start the vernalization process. We have such a long vernalization period in Ontario. Again, January 24th, that same day, by the way, Lyndsey, I planted winter wheat and I also planted spring wheat. The winter wheat was 75 bushels per acre. The spring wheat was 65 bushels per acre. The spring wheat wasn't quite as good a stand because it was a bit cold for it. But anyway, vernalization is not a concern. If it was in March, don't seed winter wheat in March. It won't work.
Right.
But yeah.
In December. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's back up a bit. Let's go back to our leaping off point from Richard's video in talking about targeting plant populations. And we've talked a little bit about managing for winter wheat going late. But Jeremy, how much have we moved the needle on doing things in bushels per acre versus seeds per acre in the cereal crop in Alberta? Are we getting there?
I mean, we're still having the conversation about it, Lyndsey. I think some habits, old habits, they die hard. It takes a while to implement those changes. But I always talk about, and I mentioned on the RealAg radio today is the variation we see in some of these 1,000 kernel weights, anywhere from 20 grams to 50 grams per 1,000 seeds, and it's just the variation is enormous. And environment's going to play a role in that, variety, classes, they're all going to play a role in that variation. So when we're dealing with an industry where the margins mean everything, those little margins, those little wins mean everything, and keeping as much consistency in what you do as you're moving forward is a value to maintaining those margins, knowing how much seed you're putting in the ground year by year, by looking at that 1,000 kernel weight, understanding where your target is. And the other thing you mentioned was mortality, which I think is an important conversation. And I actually wanted to ask Pete about, how you look at mortality and how those discussions happen in Ontario. But, knowing how much you're putting in the ground, how much is potentially going to come up based on your seed quality and your growing conditions. But the conversation is still happening, and I think there is movement, but slow and steady wins this race, I think.
So, okay, Pete, I'll put that to you then. With Jeremy asking that, I mean, for winter wheat, do you have a rule of thumb you use for mortality? Does it change based on conditions? What do you usually use?
Yeah, so that was one of the things that Richard said that jumped out at me, 10% mortality. And that's not a bad number, 10 to 15% mortality. That's sort of often the game we're in. But if I'm seeding in September and it's good soil conditions, I will often have only 2 or 3% mortality. If I end up in a year like this, where I seeded in good conditions at the end of September and then it rained all of October, man, there are some places in the field where both John and Adam are going to agree that we have 100% mortality. And so when Jeremy, when you ask me that question, it so comes down to seed bed conditions and to what happens after you put it in the ground. And there's lots of times we get 40% mortality. I think if I'm seeding if I'm frost seeding spring wheat, I know that's a harsh environment. I'm going to up my mortality because I'm probably going to lose a few more seeds. If I'm seeding on the 10th of May in southern Alberta and the weather conditions are super warm, I probably am going to pull that back to 5% mortality. But you never know for sure until after the fact, and sometimes you get caught from that standpoint. But I will say, dang it all, Jeremy, if you have people in Alberta or in Manitoba, or I don't care where,
here we go,
that are seeding by pounds or bushels per acre, they will never be a real wheat grower. Get over it. Don't bother calling me. I don't care. You want to be a real wheat grower, you got to do it by seed count.
I have a note
in
here. Triggering wheat and wheat. That's the one that does it.
I think I've mentioned this topic maybe 5 or 6 times this season, just on making sure we're looking at that 1,000 kernel weight. And I think that's a great explanation of what we're looking at in terms of mortality. And I always encourage producers to, when you're out there seeing what your actual emergence is, ask that question. How else are you supposed to know what your mortality is if you don't know what you're putting in the ground and then counting what's coming up after? Get an idea of what your mortality is every year. And then, you even take that knowledge when you get into harvest of understanding, okay, this was what my emergence is, this is what my plant stand is, and then understanding the variables through the season, and this is what my yield ended up being. But, if a producer looks at the 1,000 kernel weight every year, makes note of the seeding conditions, environmental conditions around emergence, gets that assessment of what's actually emerging, around that, spring wheat, we say usually 21 days after emergence to go in there. Usually you're in the 2, maybe 3 leaf stage, depending on environmental conditions. And then you can get an idea, okay, into these conditions, when I seeded at this time of the year, and I had good growing conditions or I had dry growing conditions, this is the kind of emergence that I saw. then you can start making better assessments of how much seed I should be putting in the ground in future years when you're targeting specific plant states.
Mm-hmm. I do want to note, actually, for anyone who missed today's radio show, you can head over to realagriculture.com tomorrow. Actually, it's up right now, but both Pete and Jeremy were on today's Real Ag Radio, and we are going to cover some of what you talked about, and we already have some, but we're going to talk about herbicides now. I want to switch gears a little bit because we've got some great questions coming in, and we promised to be a free-for-all, so let's get to some of those. And one of the things the two of you did talk about today was, of course, herbicides, the herbicide dollar. So of course, with, if we've got tight margins, inputs costing a lot, of course, we had a really tough year out west. When we're looking at herbicides, and potentially maybe not putting all the tank mix ingredients in just because we're trying to save some money, maybe talking about half rates. So I want to talk about that in just a moment, but first I want to tackle the question that we have directly about timing. So there's a question here, with fungicide, if I'm putting on a fungicide, is it okay to mix with a herbicide, or should I make a separate pass for fungicide? So Alan is asking that. So Pete from Manitoba, and Jeremy, you can take this one as well. Are fungicide timing and herbicide timing close enough, or do we have to tease those two out?
So if you really have much weed pressure at all, Alan, and in particular in spring wheat, you want those weeds taken out early. You want, if in a perfect world, all the weeds are dead in a cereal crop by the 3-leaf stage. Man, at 3 leaves, there simply is nowhere close to enough canopy to make a fungicide have any economic benefit. And so the timing on the two really get out of sync. In winter wheat, if we do fall weed control, then we have such a good canopy in the spring, we can delay our spring weed control until it's right timing for that first fungicide, and the herbicide goes along for the ride. Because those spring annuals, the ragweed, the lamb's quarters, they don't hurt our yield. They just make harvest a bit of a challenge, and they might set seed and build that bank. So sometimes we can make that work in winter wheat. In spring wheat, if you wait till the fungicide is right timing, you've given up yield on weed control. If you put the fungicide in at the right timing for weed control, you just are not going to get the results you want out of the fungicide. I just can't see. Well, if you try to do it, you're going to lose on one front or the other. That's just the reality.
Okay. So Jeremy, I'll go back to you on this herbicide discussion for sure. And if you could, maybe you did mention you're getting calls from growers, some questions on planning for next year. Is there a concern that herbicides might be one of the inputs that's cut back on?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is a challenge that, I'm even talking to producers that they're not sure when glyphosate is even going to be available. So this herbicide conversation of what's available is quite a challenge. And then on top of that, the cost of herbicide of glyphosate and Liberty has gone through the roof. I haven't heard really much outside of that in terms of pricing. So maybe if we have people watching, if they've heard of other prices going up of other chemicals, I'd be interested to hear. But this is creating a lot of challenges of can I get the product, and if I am getting a hold of the product, how do I make the most out of it? And I think one of the things is make sure we're not cutting back the rates, knowing that those costs have gone up. This is going to come back and kick you in the butt in the future, without a doubt. First off, you're not going to get full control out of those weeds. Wheat Pete just mentioned about timing and waiting a little bit later, and not all of those weeds are going to be at the same stage. So when we get those larger weeds and we do a lower application, more likely that they're going to survive. Then they're going to contribute to the weed seed bank. Then you're just going to be dealing with them in following years, and it's going to cause a disaster. On top of that, then we're talking about herbicide resistance development. This is more of a metabolism question of those plants that get hit with a lower or sublethal dose of herbicide. much more likely to get that herbicide metabolism resistance development. You may not see it that year, but it's developed those. It's developed the capacity to potentially, push through that herbicide application and then produce progeny that then would be less susceptible to even a full application rate. So we really need to make sure that we're still following label recommendation rates for these herbicides, and not cutting back.
Mm-hmm. I'll just note Charlie has decided to join us because we have a sickness going through our house, and Chris had neocitrin and probably passed out. So, right, Char? Okay, so Charlie's going to join us for the rest of the show. So this is one of those things, of course, and Pete, maybe this is also a good shout out for cutting fungicide rates as well, and then we can talk about ROI on fungicides in the West in a dry year if you want, Jeremy. But if you're going to put a product on, Pete, put all the product and put it on right?
Yeah, and so John put it in the chat. I don't care if it's a herbicide, it's a fungicide, it's an insecticide. You use the full rate, or you just are shooting yourself in the foot. The one thing that maybe we can do in Ontario, lots of growers, the label rate typically on a high load glyphosate, a 540 glyphosate, the label rate is 0.72 liters per acre, or it depends on which product in particular we're talking about. But in that game, when glyphosate wasn't too expensive, it was pretty easy to just say, put a liter on. We'll put a full liter on because we know we're going to get better control on some of the perennial weeds. If all we're after is easy to kill weeds and we're short product, maybe we go back to the lowest label rate. But even that to me is just like, we can't go below that rate for all the reasons that Jeremy said. We're going to increase the chances of getting resistant weeds. Weeds are going to escape. Those weeds always set seed. Now we have weed seed bank for moving forward. And just the same with fungicides. This concept of half-rate fungicides has been around forever. And it's, I'm driving through the field anyway with my weed control, so I'll just throw in half-rate tilt because it only costs me $2 an acre. Well, guess what? It gives you no residual. Again, we're just trying to increase the potential of resistance showing up in those diseases, and it doesn't pay. So if you're going to do it, you use the full rate, you get that residual, you manage to try and get that crop through, keep it green till grain fill is done. And I really worry that we get into this mindset of half-rate herbicides or half-rate fungicides, cut-rate herbicides will do the job. It just isn't going to. The biggest concern I have is, okay, now I don't have enough glyphosate to treat 100% of my acres. There just simply isn't supply. We ran out of glyphosate in Ontario this fall in a number of cases. We had growers that were doing burn down on soybeans, and they couldn't get glyphosate. So what do we move to if we don't have that glyphosate? And that's where Plan B, where a grower has to have Plan B in the back of their mind. And that Plan B might be, perish the thought, I should say. Can't believe I'm going to say this word, but tillage might be one of the things that we have. Yeah, exactly.
I knew it was coming, Pete.
But anyway, have a Plan B and don't cut herbicide rates where you use them.
All right. Okay. Jeremy, you've got some thoughts on the herbicide and fungicide timing out west in the spring crop. Have at it.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting comment and thought. And, when I'll admit when I started off as an agronomist, and you kind of talk about that herbicide and fungicide mixture in Western Canada, and we're protecting those early leaves, and then we have less potential for those disease-infected leaves to infect the yield-bearing leaves of wheat and barley. So the flag leaf, the penultimate leaf, and with barley, the anti-penultimate leaf. All of the research in Western Canada, the Northern Great Plains, so this is Alberta, Saskatchewan, south of the border into the US, is that putting down half-rate or full-rate fungicide at herbicide timing when it comes to wheat and barley is is a non-benefit. We're not seeing yield response. We're not seeing a quality response. It's interesting though, because when you do these applications at herbicide timing, we do see a disease reduction on those leaves, which, we would expect that if there's disease present and we're applying a fungicide, we're going to see less disease. It's just not impacting those yield bearing leaves, and it's not impacting the non-yield bearing leaves enough for it to benefit yield later on. So we really, I really strongly discourage using any type of fungicide at herbicide timing when it comes to wheat or barley. The other thing that I'll quote Dr. Michael Harding from Alberta Agriculture, and I'm paraphrasing here, but any non-beneficial application of fungicide is then selecting for fungicide resistance without a benefit. So we're spending money. We're not seeing a yield potential increase with this application at herbicide timing, but we're also increasing the risk of fungicide development in Western Canada. And I know that we haven't been using fungicides as long in Western Canada as we have in Eastern Canada. So, we haven't had that discussion as much of fungicide resistance development, but I think we really need to start having that conversation, and we really need to start looking at, and these years of having these conversations about, everything costing more. And yeah, it's great that we're seeing good grain prices, but we're not pulling off the yields to get the benefit of those higher grain prices, or trying to buy inputs in the future is then a challenge. It's important for us to think about what are we doing that's actually a high likelihood of a yield and economic response. And when we're doing these things, thinking that they're giving us these benefits, but the research has shown that there's really no benefit to it, and it's actually potentially a challenge, or creating more of a challenge in the future. I think we really need to kind of double think what we're doing there. So yeah, I just wanted to circle back on that and make sure I commented on that.
Now, I do have 2 other clips, but given the time, there's no chance we're getting to either of them. So that's par for the course, I suppose. The questions are coming in fast and furious, and there's some really great comments as well. But there's 3 things I want to talk about. Yellow wheat, Pete, right now. I do want to talk about starter fertilizer in that context of input costs as well. And then I did want to, Jason Vogt did mention that in 2021 with the drought, the one thing growers didn't cut back on was weed control. So Jason, if you can let us know, was that the right call? Would love to know. And Dr. Dave Hooker is in the comments as well. And great comment about herbicide use as opposed to cutting rates. Make sure you're going in early and get those weeds when they're wee, because then you can use the lowest registered rate, right? So, or on label rate. So timing is everything. Try and get in there as soon as you can, assuming we've got a spring that allows for it. So now, Pete, I'll go back to you, because there was a great question about, and we have certainly seen it here in Ontario, some very stressed yellow looking wheat. Is it going to be okay? Is there any hope for it?
Yeah, and so just to echo, by the way, Dr. Dave's comment about, kill those weeds when they're small and actively growing, and then the lowest label rate works. And that's easy to say on the what is the 1st of November. It might not be so easy to do on the 1st of May, but anyway, that's a great comment. Fred, the yellow wheat almost for sure will be okay, but is it hurt? And the answer is yes, it is hurt. So the wheat over the tiles that's dark green and has tillered well, that's 140 bushel wheat. The wheat between the tile runs depends on how yellow it's been for how long, and it has less tillers. If you go out and look at that wheat, it's struggled, it's been under stress. We're not seeing the 3 or 4 tillers per plant that we are where that drainage has been better. And with less tiller heads, it means less yield potential. Actually talking with Dr. Pete Berry out of the UK, and they have some really nice work out of the UK where that yellow wheat in the fall, and it varies. It doesn't always get this bad, but they've seen up to a 24% yield reduction in that yellow wheat. So is it hurt? I'm afraid it is, but can it still be 110, 120 bushel wheat? The answer is absolutely. So just make it dry out. It'll turn dark green. It'll be okay. And manage it like a wheat crop, because that's going to make you the most money.
All right. Damaged Not dead yet. 'Tis but a flesh wound. Okay. Input costs though. So let's switch gears a little bit because we do have some questions. Of course, we've talked a little bit about the herbicide discussion, but we did have further back. I think John wanted to know. So when we're putting wheat into less than favorable conditions, if I can get my words out, how important is the seed placed phosphorus? Are we still making sure, or are we just worried about getting the gosh darn seed in there? Or if we're into really hostile environments, do we still try and get that phosphorus on with that seed?
Yeah, that makes me laugh. Everybody always wants to quit doing it. So oftentimes I get the question, well, if I seed it early, there's not as much benefit, right? Because the ground's warm and the crops, so I don't need it as bad. Well, now it's, oh, well, it's so late. The stupid crop's never going to make it anyway. So we just won't bother with the phos. Get over it. Yes, it's important. And it's important because when that plant starts growing next spring, it has a high demand for phosphorus, and that phosphorus in the seed trench is still available. It hasn't gotten tied up. It hasn't gone away. Warren, it's always important to get that phosphorus with the wheat seed, and it's just as important late as it is early. The only time you walk away from that is if speed is of the essence, and we go to John's concept of broadcasting the wheat, because we don't have time to put it in the ground right, then broadcast it, work it in, and then you can't do seed placed phosphorus.
All right. Now, Jeremy, I'm going to go to you on this one, although I know Gord's in Ontario. But through all these discussions, we're talking about where do we put our input dollars, right? So if we're concerned about costs, is seed really where we try and save our money? Or is it somewhere else? So one of the comments here that Gord has was, should you be blending cheaper seed in with certified treated seed, and will that treatment sort of infer some benefit to the untreated? Love to hear some thoughts. Oh, Wheat Pete's eyes are already rolling. So Jeremy, I'll start with you. Now, Ontario plants a lot more certified seed than Manitoba and points west, let's be honest. But is seed really where you should be trying to save money in a tight margin year?
I mean, we're talking about how we establish the crop. That's like, this is where we want to be spending the money. This is where we're going to get the most value out of that crop. Is putting quality seed at the beginning of the season. And I like everything Pete had to say about putting phosphorus down with that seed. That stands true in Western Canada as well. We don't see as much of a response when we have those very high phosphorus levels. But I'm hard pressed to remember a field soil test that I looked at and said, you don't need to apply phosphorus here. It's rare. So getting that phosphorus down with the seed, that's definitely an investment you want to make. Using quality seed. The blending of different varieties is an interesting question, and it's actually a question and a topic that's come up over the past few years. And I've seen seed growers actually specifically blend certain varieties together that are of the same wheat class, so blending CWRS together or blending CPS varieties together, and actually seeing decent yield response out of it. Now, there hasn't been a lot of research done on this, so I can't say, this is something that you should do or not do. But if you're talking about taking a seed lot that is of lower quality, so it's of lower price, then I think all you're doing is essentially shooting yourself in the foot of starting your crop off a little bit poor. So using the best quality seed to get yourself started doing those higher seeding rates. This is an interesting question because it's going to be a little bit different for each farm, depending on how long we extend this question out to. Should I be maybe pulling back on fungicide and spending more money on the seeding aspect? Well, that depends on what your rotation looks like. That depends on which variety you're using. That depends on what your disease level is in your fields already based on historic disease. So, it's a complex question, and I don't think there's going to be one answer fits all. I think this is where it takes pulling together all of the agronomy knowledge that you have and asking the question of, what investments based on the research, based on my farm, is going to give me the best bang for my buck. And getting that quality seed in the ground started and moving early, getting those weeds controlled early, is definitely a high value management practice, at least when it comes to Western Canada wheat growing.
Absolutely. Pete, I have to at least let you have a crack at it, but we only have like 8 minutes left. So make it
just
brief.
real quickly, Gord, don't do it. And the reason you don't do it is dwarf bunt. You're in the snowbelt area, and dwarf bunt, when you're in the snowbelt area, if you plant untreated seed, the treated seeds are not going to protect it. In fact, it actually works the other way around. If the untreated seeds get the disease, they ramp up the pressure on the treated seeds. So if you need cheaper seed, put out on Twitter that you're looking for some bin run, and I don't promote bin run seed, but find somebody who's got 3 or 4 ton of seed that they're not going to get in the ground, and get that at lower cost to bulk up your seeding rate and get to a higher seeding rate if you have to do that. But plant treated seed if you're in the dwarf bunt area. If you don't plant treated seed, man, she can go south in a major way, and nobody wants that.
I thought you were just calling me names, but it's a disease. Okay, so Lara wants to know if we've evaluated, if we've talked about evaluating biologicals yet. We do not have a whole hour, and that would take up probably most of that. But I do want to maybe touch on that topic briefly. Maybe not so much even biologicals, but just evaluating something new. So Jeremy, what I heard in your last answer was very much sort of that GEM, right? The genetics times environment times management sort of way of thinking about how we grow a wheat crop. So where when we're talking about, managing this crop, when we're talking about how we spend our input dollars, where is there room for trying new products or new things? How do we work that into that thought process for next year? Who wants to start on that one? Okay,
I'm always of the mind of every year we don't get so many years to produce a crop, and a lot of the producers I work with out here, they're either telling me the amount of crops that they have or the amount of crops they have left. So each year is an opportunity to get an idea of whether there's opportunity to increase your agronomic management practices on your farm. So I think approaching it with that mind of, I'm just like any other business where moving forward, if I'm not moving forward, I'm likely moving backwards. But you have to move forward in a methodical, specific way that's actually giving you data that you can make movements on, that you can take and apply to future years. And, I know Pete talks about this all the time, is do your strip trials, do your replicated strip trials. I talked to a farmer in southern Alberta, and he said this once, and I just loved the way he said it, the way he approached it is, if anyone approaches my farm with something that doesn't have the scientific research backing, or even if it does, and they're trying to sell it to me, I tell them I'll do strip trials as long as they pay for half of the strip trials. And if it pays for itself and then some, I'll buy some the next year. And no one sticks around to give them any. So I think approaching it in that way of making sure that you're looking at this with a business and scientific mindset of gaining information that you can then make decisions on in the future. And sometimes that takes doing seeding rate trials more than 1 year, or fungicide application trials in more than 1 year, because we all know that every year is a little bit different. Sometimes we'll have a bit more moisture, sometimes we have a bit more heat, sometimes the rotation's a little bit different. So I think spending a portion of our dollars, it doesn't have to be the same amount every year, but a portion of our dollars in time on doing some of these trials, whether it be biologicals or even testing increased nitrogen rates, or changing your fertility plan, and when you change to a new variety, or your fungicide plan when you change to a new variety. Something as basic as that is going to help you garner more knowledge for all of those future crops that you'll have.
Well said. Pete, what do you have to add?
No, I think Jeremy covered it really well. Do the dang trials. I don't care if it's biologicals. I don't care if it's this weird guy called Wheat Pete says put phosphorus with your wheat seed. Do the strip trials on your own farm and make sure that it pays. I mean, when you look at that research data, as Jeremy pointed out, you have high soil test levels. You can get to the point where you don't need it. So you really do have to do those trials no matter what product. And biologicals, by the way, Lyndsey, just quickly, are a totally different beast. And it's one thing to add phosphorus to increase phosphorus availability. It's a whole nother thing to put a biology in there that has to compete with all the other millions and trillions of soil bugs that are in your soil. And man, that's a tough sled for those biological products. And there's some real wins. There's some that do a great job, but it's a tough sled.
And I mean, you've hit on something there, Pete, for sure. That to me, I mean, it means that there's amazing things we probably have yet to discover. But exactly that, it's a very complicated system, and to think, just adding a bit of this or a bit of that is going to really make a huge leap. It's probably going to be little jumps instead. And yes, great explanation, Jeremy, and fantastic. I do want to quickly hit on one topic, Pete, because if anybody listens to Wheat Pete's Word, goes up Wednesdays on realagriculture.com. There's even a phone in line for those of you who don't want to listen to it on the internet. Hey, there are people like that. There was, of course, a couple weeks ago, you did send in some pictures about just a carpet of volunteer beans, soybeans and edible beans that had sprouted after. And so a couple questions about either the impact they might have on the wheat crop that's there, and John says, will the resprouted soybeans in Southern Ontario, because of warm temps and combine losses, result in an N credit for next year? I'm anti-soybean sometimes, like at the best of times, so I'm just going to say no. But I'm not an agronomist, so I'm not really allowed to say that. So, Pete, will the resprouted soybeans give an N credit, and will they also hurt the winter wheat that's there?
So, great question. The answer is, in the research that we've done, and that was with edible beans. Peter Sickerman did some nice research, and in that research, the edible beans actually were a yield increase to the following winter wheat crop, but they were at nowhere near the pressure that we're seeing in some of these soybean fields. So they were sort of at about a 1 to 2 bushel per acre loss. In some of these hailed fields, we have 25 bushel per acre soybeans that are sprouting, even in some of the combine fields. And we don't normally see this because we get frost early enough to take it out. But I've counted up to 7 bushels per acre. And at those pressures, at that weed pressure, you kind of start to wonder if it will have a negative impact. Now, we've looked at volunteer canola in winter wheat as well. And there the pressure can be quite heavy. We've never seen fall weeds or those fall weeds that die over winter reduce yields, but I would never say never with those kind of levels. To the end credit, John, yeah, there's an end credit there. And that's kind of cool. Yep. Sorry, Lyndsey, you're wrong on that. We're not sure how much because we haven't actually done the work, but we do know that we'll see an end credit, and whether that end credit is better for the winter wheat crop or it would be better if you grew corn, we simply don't know because we're not sure when those soybeans are going to dump their nitrogen. But my guess is that they're dumping it fairly early, and so there will be a nitrogen credit to the wheat crop.
All right, I just want to point out that you said about a 7 bushel per acre loss. So how many seeds per acre is that? I'm just kidding. Anyway, we're not allowed to seed in bushels per acre. We can't measure losses, and I'm just kidding. Okay, John, so there, Lyndsey, yeah. Okay, here's what I have against soybeans, okay? They don't leave a lot of residue, and they're kind of hideous at harvest. So that's it. That's all.
They're horrible for soil health. They are horrible for soil health.
Well, you said it, not me, but you also said that people could do tillage this year. So I'm just leaving that one on the table.
In the spring.
Why am I in the middle of this? Why am I in the middle of this? I feel like I should be on the other side of it with you two.
Jay, producer Jay, move him over to the side with some popcorn. Get the man some popcorn. Okay. Anyway, perhaps. Anyway, this has been pretty fantastic. We have, for everybody following along at home, we have like an entire page of questions that we didn't get to. So we do have a couple minutes. Jeremy or Pete, anything we didn't cover tonight that you absolutely want to get out there right now for our audience and for those who will be listening along? This was a challenging season, certainly in the West. We hope for a better one next year. Pete, it's been a challenging fall. So, so Jeremy, if you've got anything you want to fit in there from your list. Oh, goodness, it's a good list.
I'm thinking about all the conversations we've had, and we've covered a ton of stuff today. And I think, I'll add on that RealAg has done an amazing job of covering all of the challenges that Western Canadian producers have been dealing with as well, in terms of, what are we doing with this drought and this heat, and how is that impacting, nitrogen for next year, and what should we be thinking about? And I think that's one thing that I continue to encourage, is make sure we're taking our soil tests. I had a couple conversations today about how is this residual nitrogen going to impact future crops? How is it going to impact how much fertilizer I need to buy? We're seeing these fertilizer prices go up and up and up, and if we take a step back, and there's so many investments that need to be made on a farm. And these are year in investments. But we should be really making that hard list of what are the investments that are investing in my farm? Like what am I spending year to year that are giving me the most returns? And that quality seed. And it sounds like, the seed treatment that Pete mentioned in Ontario, that's something that's going to give that return, your phosphorus there. So really, what are the investments that we can make that we're confident are going to give us information to invest in our farm, even, expanding on that? What's going to extrapolate from there? So really asking that question as we head into, this really expensive input here.
Mm-hmm. All right. Pete, what have we not hit on your list?
Well, so actually the one thing that I wanted to point out is that Jason answered your question about, was that weed control the right decision in a dry year? And I wrote it down. His answer was amazing, where the difference in the nitrogen credit that he's seeing this fall from controlling or not controlling. So for the people who can't see the chat, it was 100 pounds of nitrogen where they controlled that volunteer growth in the fall, and where they didn't, the plants took up enough that there's only 27-pound credit. So wow, that's incredible. Is there other things on my list? There's so many things on my list. The one thing I want to throw out there, though, Lyndsey, is, for goodness sakes, listen to your crop. If you are seeing yellow wheat in the combine tracks, and I should have given you a picture to put up. I apologize, Lyndsey, but man, the people in Michigan have been sending us pictures of yellow wheat behind the drill tire tracks. I have lots of pictures of where the combine went on an angle and we drilled through it, and every combine track is yellow. We didn't get a chance to talk about compaction, this soil health. There's so many more things, but listen to your crop, because those visual symptoms are telling you what you're doing wrong from a management standpoint. And man, when I look at the winter wheat on my home farm, I just go, oh, I need a better agronomist. My gosh, I need a better agronomist. So listen to your crop.
Call Jeremy. Or Jason in Manitoba. There you go. Call these guys. And what I got from that, Pete, is that your winter wheat is very judgy. But also, we only have an hour, so we can't cover possibly everything, including compaction. But I do think we did cover a lot of ground here, which is fantastic. There's always more. great questions. And yes, thanks to Jason for answering that question in the comments, because a couple of weeks ago we were having this discussion, of course, in a very dry year. Do you do the fall weed control? Do you not? And that N isn't necessarily gone, but it's now in a nitrogen cycle that it's not in the soil necessarily. You're going to have to wait for that to be released some other time. And when, we don't know. So that's always a good point too, is that had you controlled those weeds, you'd have a little more certainty in that soil test, but only if you did the soil test. So there you go. That's my plug for tonight. Fantastic discussion. Thank you to both of you. I got one clip in. I'm going to start probably getting in trouble for not running more of them. But thanks to both of you, of course, for being on RealAg Radio today as well. And here on the show, we do appreciate so much your time and your expertise and your knowledge and sharing it all with us. So thank you. And thank you to everyone in the comments for being here. And yes, Viren, if you need a hat, just let me know. He says that people should get prizes for making it all the way through the show. So
I don't know if that's a comment. Yeah. on how excited we are or how patient he is.
It's a lot of things. It's complicated. Anyway, all right. So of course, everyone, you can head over to realagriculture.com/agronomist tomorrow. Get your CEU credits. And as always, we're here Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you to Peter Wheat, Pete Johnson, and to Jeremy Boychyn for joining me this evening. Cheers, everybody.